We reserve.
Continues to reserve his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Russell.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. What is it that objectors are truly afraid of? We hear the words civilian control of the military as if somehow those American citizens that have borne the brunt of service or battle are somehow no longer entitled to their citizenship, forever imprinted with some mark of Cain. What are opponents trying to say? Is it we are afraid of the warrior class? We are afraid that they might cause a war? American battle-hardened warriors understand the need to prevent human suffering, the chaos of destroyed communities, the loss of order, the lack of public services, and carnage caused by weapons, disease, or hopelessness. My own observation is that the greatest saber-rattling often seems to occur from bloviating politicians that have never borne the sword. What are opponents trying to say? Is it we are afraid they might take over the government? Well, if there was ever an opportunity for that concern, it was in the 1790s. President George Washington, a general, was revered. He had appointed to his cabinet 5 generals and a couple of colonels. If there was ever a time for a military takeover of the United States, it was then. Instead, George Washington relinquished the most important, powerful position in the land. He, like all warriors, understood what it meant to serve their country. If you look at our own secretaries of state, historically, nearly 1/3 had military service, with 10 obtaining senior rank. The parade of notable senior warriors serving as Secretary of State remind us that military leaders have often made the best foreign policy for our country. Why no such concerns about military takeover there? On observation, it appears as if America has a phobia of civilian control of diplomacy. General Mattis is a warrior who will put the national security and peace of the United States above all other concerns. He will do it with humility and continued selfless service. He needs to be wavered and confirmed immediately for the good of our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Washington continues to reserve. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the legislation that would allow General James Mattis to be allowed to serve as our Secretary of Defense. As a member of Congress, we're sworn to uphold the Constitution and defend our country against its enemies. In order to secure our national security, we must have a seamless transition from one administration to another when it comes to military leadership. I somehow wonder which other cabinet appointees has the House questioned, and the answer is none. Although this requires a waiver, there's a Senate confirmation process that determines whether or not General James Mattis is the right person. So they are not stealing. I wish he would have testified in front of our committee, but there's no requirement that he testify in front of our committee. That is why we have the Senate. It is their duty to vet the candidates for these positions. It is their duty to confirm the candidates for each of the cabinet positions, and no other member who is trying to be on the cabinet has to come before the House and testify. I do wish General Mattis is, because he would have excelled like he's done in every other thing he's done in his life. I have concerns about the legislation undermining civilian control also, but I also, like Colonel Russell, think that there may not necessarily be the need for that. But even if there is civilian control of the military. The President is Commander-in-Chief. The Secretary of Defense answers to the Commander-in-Chief, who is a civilian. Some people say inter-service rivalry may be the reason that they want him to stay out for 7 years. I can assure you that 30 years from today, General Mattis will be as much a Marine as he is today, and 7 years or 4 years or 10 years or 30 years will not prevent him from being a Marine every day for the rest of his life, as it was the days preceding it. Passing this legislation ensures that our military will have a leader on the day the President is sworn in. And like my member before me,
Mr. Speaker, I yield additional 30 seconds to the
gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
General Grant served as Commander-in-Chief of the Union armies and later of all the armies of the U.S., and then was president within 4 years of having that title. General Eisenhower served as Supreme Commander and then served as President of the United States, the ultimate civilian authority. And General Washington was also our first president. I ask that we pass this legislation and that we say yes to General Mattis. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington with 26 minutes remaining.
Thank you. I yield myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
Not to be a stickler for detail, but we're actually not giving a waiver here. We are changing the law, and that is what makes this appointment different. When you confirm someone to the cabinet, the gentleman is absolutely right. The Senate, that's their authority. It's in the Constitution. We don't get involved in that. But when you're changing a law, the House has a say in that. It's the Senate and the House. And the fact that this debate actually makes me even more strongly opposed to this bill as I continue to hear about how, we just don't matter. The Senate's got it. Trump's got it. What do we need to do? We have a responsibility as the House, and when you're changing a law, it has to go through the Senate and the House.
Gentleman's time. Gentleman's time is reserved. Gentleman from Texas with 20 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Dr. Gallagher.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, like every Marine of my generation, during my time in the Corps, I gained a profound respect for General Jim Mattis as simply the finest warrior that we've produced since Chesty Puller. And much has been made in the last few weeks about his warfighting prowess. But what commands my respect, why I rise today, and what I believe binds Jim so closely to the hearts of everyone who has ever worn the uniform, is his humility. General Mattis understands not only how to wield military power decisively, but also its limits. General Mattis also realizes that the true source of our military strength doesn't come from the E-ring of the Pentagon, but rather from the fighting spirit of the brave soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are deployed right now doing a very dangerous job. And as the chairman mentioned, they deserve a Secretary of Defense on day one, and with Jim Mattis as that secretary, they will have a leader that always puts their welfare first and their mission first. Now, I respect the concerns of my colleagues about the longstanding principle of civilian control of the military. But I know Jim Mattis personally, and I know how seriously he holds this principle as well. When I deployed to Iraq in 2007 and again in 2008, it was the words of General Mattis that reminded us that if we ever showed contempt for civilians, we would give the enemy a victory. And so I say, for the mission's sake, for our country's sake, and the sake of men and women who have carried our colors in past battles, let's come together today in support of Jim Mattis and thereby send a signal to the world that there is once again no better friend, no worse enemy than the United States of America. Thank you. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington reserves his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of S-84 today to do this one-time exception so that we can have General Mattis as our next Secretary of Defense. Today, our nation is confronted with a complex array of transregional threats. We exist in one of the most dynamic and dangerous periods in our history, and these list of threats grow more vast and more dangerous. And in the meantime, our military readiness are at dangerous lows, and our modernization falls behind. But amidst these dangers, we are fortunate to be presented with a historic opportunity to select and elevate one of the most distinguished military leaders in our nation's history to the position of Secretary of Defense. General Mattis is many things. He's an infantry Marine, a decorated warrior, an experienced combat leader, and a respected commander who has fought our nation's wars and knows firsthand the human costs of war and the consequences of operating unguided by strategy. James Mattis is also a strategic thinker who understands that true strength and security results from coordinated application of all elements of national power, our diplomatic influence, our economic wealth, our values, and only when absolutely necessary, our military force. Mr. Speaker, not since George Marshall have we had a nominee whose distinguished military service record and mastery of operational art is matched by his intellectual prowess and grasp of strategy. One thing else is clear. Not since George Marshall have we needed this type of leader as our Secretary of Defense. We need a Secretary of Defense Mattis on day one of the Trump administration. A vote no means we won't have them on day 1. It could be day 3 or day 30. And our men and women in uniform deserve General Mattis as their Secretary of Defense on day 1. These are extraordinary times, and General Mattis is an extraordinary leader. We need him on day 1. I urge support for the one-time exception, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to express my strong support for granting a waiver for James Mattis's continuing his distinguished service to our nation as our next Secretary of Defense. We live in deeply troubling times as America's standing in the world and our military readiness have both deteriorated significantly over the past 8 years. Whether it is only 1/3 of active Army's brigade combat teams being ready for combat, or Marines being forced to pull spare parts from museum aircraft to repair their FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jets, these are not the marks of a ready force. This moment requires trusted leadership and someone with a genuine understanding of what is required of our brave men and women to stand ready when our nation calls. There is no one better equipped to understand the dangers that we face, how to repair our world image, and set us on a path to rebuilding our military than President-elect Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis. General Mattis embodies all of the traits we should look for when selecting a Secretary of Defense. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, I look forward to working with him to put our military back on sure footing and help and advance our nation toward peace and stability. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the measure, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this legislation. Civilian control of the military is a very important principle that has served our country well. Current law provides that there should be a 7-year gap between military service and serving as the Defense Department Secretary. This is a general rule, but we know there are always exceptions to the rule. That is what this legislation makes today, clearing the path for a retired general who has been back in the civilian world for more than 3.5 years. I support this exception because we live in exceptional times. Over the past 15 years, we have seen millions of American service members deployed overseas. Thousands are still deployed. They have served well and served with courage. Many of them and their families have paid a particularly heavy price. More than 6,000 did not come home. Tens of thousands sustained life-changing injuries. Thousands have injuries we cannot see, and many families broke under the pressure of repeated deployments. Retired General James Mattis, now a civilian, has been there. He's been with these soldiers. He's been with these families. I appreciate the perspective General Mattis will bring to the Defense Department and President-elect's national security team. He understands, more than most, in a very personal way, the gravity of putting our service members in harm's way. He understands the moral obligation we have to ensure that those who are sent into harm's way are properly equipped. As important, he will be able to convey to his national security counterparts the impact decisions made in Washington have on the warfighter. General Mattis is the right person at the right time. I encourage my colleagues to support this waiver and vote for this legislation. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington's time is reserved. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this measure. I think it's important to point out when you talk about civilian control, Jim Mattis is, in fact, a civilian. He's not in command of any Marine divisions right now, and I don't think prior military service should be held against him when he has the ability to offer additional service to the country. I hear this argument that, well, he's a retired general, he's subject to the UCMJ. That is not an argument that has much merit, because if that were the case, you couldn't have retired military officers serve in the Congress, because if they were still considered military officers, it would violate the incompatibility clause of the Constitution. Now, this 7-year statutory restriction, I think it's understandable, but I don't think it's in any way sacrosanct. If you go back to the founding of our country, a 7-year restriction would have prevented George Washington from being the first civilian commander-in-chief because he had resigned his commission in 1784. He took the oath of office as our first president, 1789. Nobody was under any illusions that he was a civilian and he was somebody who was revered. Now, it's true the founders feared the civil being subordinate to the military, but that's because they thought Republican government could be overrun by a military junta. We don't have that danger here. We have a civilian president of the United States, a civilian Congress that's charged under the Constitution with providing and maintaining our Navy, with raising and supporting our armies, and prescribing rules for the regulation of the armed forces. And we will have Jim Mattis, who is a civilian, as a Secretary of Defense. This man, Jim Mattis, has been a faithful servant to our country. He's also a strategic thinker who I think can do a great job in rebuilding our military and getting our national security policy on a firmer, stronger foundation. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington continues to reserve. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Taylor.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I rise to speak in support of General Mattis. I rise to speak to my colleagues, both Republican and Democrat. I rise to appeal to the unity of our chamber, unity of our voice to the world, unity for our men and women who voluntarily fight on our behalf. Less than 1% of this nation has gone forth for the past 15 years, over and over, sacrificing their youth, time with their loved ones, and sometimes their lives. Imagine you're standing there next to your spouse, best friend, battle buddy at attention. A flag-draped coffin passes you by, carried by an honor guard dressed in impeccable military uniform. Uncontrollable tears flow around the room as the ceremonial flag is tightly folded and presented to the stoic Gold Star family. Amazing Grace played on the bagpipes is at once the most beautiful and the most dreadful tone you have ever heard. You yearn to hear it again, and you never want to hear it again. Men and women like General Mattis, who have been here, understand true costs of war. Men and women like Mattis will think deliberately and carefully about putting the military into harm's way. Men and women like Mattis will fight very hard to put the tools and the leadership in the hands of the military members so that they may win. Military members, perhaps more than our civilian counterparts, understand civilian control of the armed forces. For in every headquarters building General Mattis or anyone else has served in, there is a prominent display of pictures of civilian leadership above military commanders. I am not naive to the politics. I too believe he should have been here yesterday. But those opposed have made their point. We were divided yesterday, but we can unify today. I ask that you rise above politics. I ask you to support General Mattis, not just with your words, but with your vote. I ask that you show the same unity military members show each other every single day. Let's give them a leader on day one. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington continues to reserve. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'd inform the chair that I have no additional requests for time and reserve the balance of my time in order to close.
Gentleman from Texas reserves his time. Gentleman from Washington with 25½ minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will not take the full 25½, so you can relax. I do yield myself the balance of the time. And I thank the folks for the debate. I think it's been very good as it was in committee. But it is disturbing to hear this described as, politics, or we feel slighted and we should rise above that. This isn't what this is about. It is about us exercising our constitutional authority as members of the House and our constitutional authority as members of the Armed Services Committee. It's about us being relevant in the process and doing our jobs, as I said in the opening. And again, there is every opportunity to confirm, to confirm and then also pass this change in the law that's necessary to make General Mattis the next Secretary of Defense. We can simply insist with the transition team that he appear before our committee. And as I have pointed out, if we'd done that in the first place, we could have met the January 20th deadline. And even now, We could still do it by January 23rd or 24th. And I don't think a few days would make that big a difference compared to the institution of the House actually mattering. Now, I will say that as I listen to the debate today, I've become even a little bit more disturbed as we've heard some of the reasoning behind supporting this change in the law to allow General Mattis to become the Secretary of Defense. As was said, basically the Trump administration is going to do this kind of thing quite frequently, as one member of the opposite party said. So we should just get used to it. I really do think that makes it all the more important that at this point, at this moment, that we assert our authority. And again, we can do that and have a bipartisan vote and approve General Mattis. We just have to insist upon it instead of rolling over and accepting what the transition team has said. That was my original argument. I will not belabor it or restate it. I think it is compelling. I think we should stand up for our rights here in the House and on the Armed Services Committee. The final thing I will say is, while I have an enormous amount of respect for General Mattis, and like many who have spoken, I have not served in the armed services. I didn't work with him there, but I certainly have worked with him on the committee. I will point out that General Mattis is not God. And as we listen to the people talk here about how we absolutely have to have somebody from the warrior class lead us in the military, that we have to have him in there in order to protect us from this dangerous world, that sort of language kind of makes me a little nervous. That's the point of civilian control of the military. We do not want to be run by the warrior class alone. Now, absolutely, we have many members on both sides of the aisle who have served in the military, and I think that's terrific. That perspective is enormously important. It is not the only perspective that is important to running a representative democracy. And we've heard comparisons to the Roman Empire. Again, another analogy that is somewhat troubling. That's not what we want. But more than anything, what we don't want is we don't want a president who thinks that he can roll over the House Armed Services Committee and the entire House anytime he feels like it, frankly, as in this case, for no reason. General Mattis, as everyone has admitted, was perfectly prepared to testify, perfectly prepared to come before us, and they simply decided not to send him. And I don't think it was mere pettiness or anything like that. I've watched the way President-elect Trump conducts himself, and he is, shall we say, aggressive. And I think they wanted to make it clear they're going to be running things, and we better get the heck out of the way. Well, that's not what I was elected to do as a member of the House Armed Services Committee or a member of the House. We are not here simply to get out of the way of President Obama or President-elect Trump. We are here to stand up for the people who elected us and for the country and to do our jobs. In this case, for no good reason, we were denied the ability to do that. So again, I will urge members to vote down this bill today so that we can assert our authority, hear from General Mattis, get him approved, go forward, but do it in a way that shows that the House of Representatives and the House Armed Services Committee actually matter. We cannot set the precedent that the President of the United States can simply ignore us on a whim. So I would urge us to vote no on this matter. I yield back. I want to again thank the chairman for his leadership on this. We've worked very closely on this issue amongst many others, and echo the comments of the freshman colleague from California. This is a very bipartisan committee. It will continue to be. We've done a bill for 55 straight years, and I'm hoping we'll make it 56 this year, and I look forward to working with Chairman Thornberry, all the members of the committee, and all the members of the House to achieve that goal. And with that, I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas with 8.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I completely agree. This is a bipartisan committee. Here we have a large amount of agreement, but we have a difference of judgment on what is best for the country. I would say to all members, we're about to do our job, and that is vote up or down on legislation that would allow General Mattis to serve. Now, we're not irrelevant because if we don't vote for this legislation, he does not serve. So that's what members are elected to do, to vote. And we're about to vote, and we have essentially two choices. The comment, Mr. Speaker, as I made clear, I share many of the concerns about the process, about some of the decisions that the transition people made. There has been a lot of discussion about this setting a poor precedent. But actually, there's only one precedent before us. That was 1950 with General Marshall, and General Marshall himself did not testify in front of the House or the Senate on the waiver legislation. It was only after the waiver legislation was signed into law that General Marshall came to testify in front of the Senate for his confirmation hearing. But there is nothing that is different from what we're doing today from the only precedent that exists. So the notion that we are suddenly irrelevant, that we are harming the House, etc., I believe is mistaken. I hope that we do not have a national security crisis on January 21st or 22nd, but the fact is, unless we pass this bill today, we are not able to have a Secretary of Defense on January 20th. And I think, given the state of the world, given a number of other factors, it is important that we do so. Just two other brief points, Mr. Speaker. The press is reporting that the White House has indicated that President Obama will sign this legislation. I hope he does. That would ensure that General Mattis, if confirmed by the Senate on January 20th, will go ahead and be sworn in and take office at that point. There are, as I said, many concerns about how this was handled, the wording, etc. But the bottom line, as some of my colleagues mentioned, is that there are men and women who have volunteered to serve our nation, even at the risk of their own lives. There are Americans throughout the country that depend on those men and women to keep them safe and secure. They deserve, all of them deserve, to have a Secretary of Defense who is fully functional on day one of the administration. The only way that happens is to vote yes. I urge my colleagues to do so and yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate is expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 48, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. Third reading.
An act to provide for an exception to a limitation against appointment of persons as Secretary of Defense within 7 years of relief from active duty as a regular commissioned officer of the Armed Forces.
Question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed. Gentleman from Washington. Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to House Resolution 48 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of Senate Concurrent Resolution 3. Will the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Holding, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of S-Con Res, which the clerk will report by title.
Concurrent resolution setting forth the congressional budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2017 and setting forth.
All right, guys. So they passed a law to let General Mattis be voted in as Secretary of Defense. Well, you'll be seeing it right now. They're just trying to pass the budget for 2017. But General Mattis will be allowed to get voted in to be the Secretary of Defense. All of the votes will be on Inauguration Day, but on Tuesday, all the final hearings will come to be adjourned. So make sure that you join us here on Tuesday. We will start our stream at 6 a.m. That's Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. Sessions the hearing for Sessions will end. The hearing for Betsy DeVoe will end. Elaine Chao, General Mattis, and Ben Carson. So basically all of the hearings will end this Tuesday. We'll stream it all day. And then on January the 20th will be Inauguration Day. We'll start our coverage at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. And we will go throughout the whole day. So make sure that you guys join us. If you are new to our community, we encourage you to subscribe. We upload every single day, and we bring you all of the latest news, and also we live stream all events like the hearings and press conference and all the other stuff that's going to be coming after President Trump is sworn in. So make sure, like I said, you join us. And if you guys want to stay on the chat for now and watch the Senate or the House vote on different issues, you guys can stay and chill. I'll keep the stream rolling until the House shuts down. All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I have to start recording our daily news videos that we're going to bring out in just a few hours. So stay tuned for those. We got two pretty interesting articles coming out. One will come out at 3 p.m. Pacific, and the other one will come out at 5 p.m. Pacific. So stay tuned for those. Follow us on Twitter. Like us and rate us on Facebook. And check out our previous videos that we have up on our channel. And we hope to see you guys here next time. Again, we will be streaming on Tuesday starting at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, and we will start our inauguration coverage at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern on January the 20th. I'd like to give a special thanks to Gorf. He's our assistant editor, and also to all the moderators on the chat. Hope to see you guys here next time. Peace. For those that had recently joined us, they voted earlier, a few minutes ago. You can go back on the stream if you can. They voted him to be able to get confirmed by the Senate. So they made a special law, special legislation just for General Mattis so he can actually get voted on January the 20th so he can become the Secretary of Defense. So he already got the clearance. Now it's up to the Senate to confirm him, and he will become the Secretary of Defense on the first day. That is actually on the 21st of January. So that's what happened, in case you just joined us.